Welcome, friends. This is Brian Hudson. I want to welcome you to another edition of Conversations in Focus here on Vision Stream Network. This program design is very simple to bring people who I believe are doing great work in our community and God's kingdom. And I want to bring a guest today who is doing exactly that. His name is Dr. Ivan Douglas Hicks. Welcome, Dr. Hicks.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you, Pastor Hudson, for the opportunity to come and to share with you on Vision Stream Network.
Thank you. Dr. Hicks has served as the senior minister for the historic First Baptist Church in North Indianapolis since April of 1999. He is the son of a pastor, Dr. H. Beecher Hicks, in Washington, D.C., where he was raised. In 2003, Dr. Hicks earned a Doctor of Philosophy, PhD, from Temple University in Philadelphia. Dr. Hicks is also a graduate of the Union Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio, where he earned a Master of Divinity degree in 1994. Dr. Hicks is an alumnus of Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. He and his wife, Christia Lynette Hicks, are the parents of three daughters, two girls who are twins, both singers in college, and an 11-year-old. As you discover in our conversation, Dr. Hicks leads an organization called the Indianapolis Ministerium, which is doing policy work regarding children and widows. He has a biblical perspective about how churches and ministers can do work in our society. You'll be inspired and informed by what he and a team of other pastors and policymakers are doing. It's quite inspiring to hear. Visit our website at visionstreamnetwork.tv, where you'll find a listing of other programs that we're hosting and producing, as well as our podcast. This podcast, Conversations in Focus, is available on Apple Podcasts, on TuneIn, so be sure to subscribe and receive each episode as it becomes available. Our first question here is, what is the Indianapolis Ministerium and the meaning behind its name?
Well, the Indianapolis Ministerium is an organization that brings together members of the faith community, pastors that are concerned about social justice and care to do the necessary advocacy work, specifically around the relief of the poor. The mantra we use is that we vanguard the causes of widows and children, the most vulnerable within society. And so we're a statewide organization that among the faith community provides a vehicle by which we can work effectively, the state legislature, and to specifically create the political environment for a positive outcome for those that are hardest hit or the most vulnerable within society.
Yes, and the meaning of the name, Ministerium.
Yeah, so it's interesting. The name is one that I brought from Washington, D.C. My father pastored Metropolitan Baptist Church. He's the pastor emeritus of Metropolitan Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. And early on in his pastorate there, he was called upon to ordain a woman in the ministry, and the Baptist Ministerial Alliance there in Washington, D.C. did not agree with it, and so he was elected out of the Baptist Ministers Association within that area. And he and others, perhaps more progressive pastors, formed an organization that allowed for not just men clergy persons, but women clergy persons to be a part of an organization that was certainly in the late 80s deemed to be more progressive. And so in that light, I guess that's where we discovered the name.
Okay.
But if you technically look it up, it's a body of ecclesiastical potentates. I don't know.
Well, it's an avant-garde name.
Yeah,
it
sounded cool, so we chose it, right?
Yeah, but it speaks to the purpose too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
This is not. It's. I know ministers are a large part of this, but it's something bigger than local church. It's a kingdom effort.
Yeah. This is a kingdom initiative, and if we look at Matthew, the 25th chapter, we see that Jesus says that we are to vanguard these causes, that we're to uplift those that are downtrodden, feed those that are hungry, clothe those that are naked, visit those that are sick and in prison. When we look at the Old Testament, we see that the prophet, yes, spoke truth to power. Oftentimes the prophet was required to speak to that particular community to give them the word that God provided. But the prophet was also looked upon for leadership and to provide relief for those that stood most in need. And in that vein, the ministerium is established as an organization among pastors and faith persons around the entire state as we grow from Indianapolis, right? Because we're a very new organization. But in order for us to be effective at the state level, we have to make sure that we are a statewide organization that that is not homogenous, that does not simply reflect one demographic or one ideology even, but there are causes specifically around widows and children that we should all galvanize around. And no matter what our doctrine is, no matter what our faith belief system is even, we ought to be able to work to infuse some faith action into the body politic.
Yes. You actually answered the second question somewhat, is what inspired you to begin ministerium, and I'll just let you expand upon that. Was there a seminal moment? Was there an idea? Was there something in prayer? What inspired you and others to begin this work?
Yeah, well, we had an opportunity a couple of years ago to help create a cultural environment at School 42, the Ignite Achievement Academy. I had an opportunity to provide a tour for Richard Reynolds and Timothy Taylor and Preston Adams, 4 pastors here in town that were interested to see how this innovation network in this area is emerging, and specifically how we could create an Afrocentric or a culturally specific school. And so we had a coffee conversation right after that tour that said, that allowed for us to have, take next steps to say, look, we need to be about this work. How can we be more effective as a ministerial community here in Indianapolis, Indiana, and how can we provide the necessary leadership to create a legal legacy, to create systemic change, yes, but through public policy advocacy. And so that's what we sought to do, and said that we can't do this by ourselves. And we, in February of 2019, a little more than almost a year ago, we had our first, reveal, if you will, of what we sought to do, and in a very academic way. I think that we pulled together a community of educational advocates, because our presupposition was that education is the social justice avenue and platform and the sandbox we need to work in. We felt was educational equity. And so we pulled together a faith community consultation at the United Way. To dig deeper, we felt that pre-K and early childhood education in the state of Indiana was something that we needed to work on. And so we started at the United Way with the creation of Friends There to find out more about early childhood education and their advocacy work in that legislative session. But at the same time, we reached out to others in the educational advocacy arena, from the United Way, from the United Negro College Fund. We also reached out to the Children's Policy and Law Initiative and Dr. Gwen Kelly and Janae Hanger. And at that consultation at the United Way, we had a room full of pastors and the faith community there to talk about educational equity. And we heard about many things, but the heinous bill 279 that was going to take 12 and 13-year-olds to jail as and with adults. That was presented by the Children's Policy and Law Initiative, Dr. Gwen Kelly, and the ministerium, this group of pastors, galvanized to that issue and said that we need to provide some faith infusion. We need to make sure we do what we can do as a faith community to get the word out about this and to actively fight against something that was reactionary, but the implications of it and the application of it would be hurtful, specifically to our concern as prophets, which is the widows and children. Children will be hurt, particularly those that do not have the money to or the wherewithal to make it through a criminal justice system that requires money to effectively work your way through. And so there would be a disproportionate effect on those in areas that are already disproportionately hurt.
Just so I'm clear, and for those who are viewing outside of our state,
Yes.
You were saying just now that there was a proposal to try children and to place them in institutions incarcerated with adults?
With adults. It was Senate Bill 279, and Senator Houchins, I saw her yesterday at another hearing down there this session, but Senator Houchins presented a bill, and it was based on a shooting that took place in Noblesville, Indiana,
Yes.
where a young man went into a school and shot, and he didn't kill anybody. And because he didn't kill anybody, because of his age, he was, in some people's estimation, certainly handled as a juvenile and not as an adult. Many would,
According to the law.
yeah, according to the law, many thought that he should have, because of the nature of the crime, been handled a little bit more callously. And so it led to, and the rage behind that situation led to the creation of a law 279 that said that 12 and 13-year-olds now, for attempted murder, can now be housed and be treated as adults. And so,
Okay, that's the context.
Yeah.
Now, how is it that, well, I can see how, from a policy standpoint, reaction to a heinous event, we don't condone what happened, but how much policy has been developed based on reaction to something bad happening? I understand we have to do something, but isn't it a bit of a reach?
right. Well, that's the reason for this advocacy. That's the
Yes.
reason for us to, if you have a family member in the nursing home, go check on them. If you have a relative that's in the hospital, go check on them so that there's some accountability there. When you have someone that goes to court, make sure somebody goes to court with them, because there's that accountability. And so it's the same way with these laws that come forward. Somebody has to be there watching. Somebody has to be there saying that there are a lot of times well-intended laws that have results that are very hurtful. And we have to think these things through. We have to make sure that, as opposed to just reacting and saying, okay, let's take 12 and 13-year-olds to jail at this age and try them as adults. Well, you have to understand who's going to be hit by that. You have to think about that. Who's going to wind up in these jails? Those that, once again, don't have the financial wherewithal
Yes.
to navigate this system. And so we were able to, in a number of ways, some ways public and some ways private, but we were in a number of ways able to carry out a campaign to support the leadership and the work of the Children's Policy and Law Initiative. Because in order for the faith community and for pastors in Indianapolis, Indiana, and as we spread throughout the state, in order for us to be effective, it is not necessarily necessary for us to lead anything, because that's not necessarily our goal. Our goal is to make sure we are providing the necessary faith infusion on specific issues so that there can be some legislative gain at the State House.
Yes.
And so it's strong work, it's powerful work, it's work for which many feel to be called in different ways. And so we're appreciative for Vision Stream Network and for your leadership and willingness to utilize your gifts, talents, and abilities to spread the word about our our work and to use the resources, the asset. How do we manage the assets? How do we manage the blessings of people and personnel and ideas? How do we manage that effectively in order to satisfy and to achieve the goal, which is relief for widows and children, the most vulnerable within society?
And that's the heart of Christ.
Yeah.
And that's part of my purpose in my engagement is I really feel that if we don't have our own voice, people will create narratives for us.
Right.
So it's important for us to have our own voice, like we're doing right now, to hear from people such as yourself, get it straight, get it real, keep it real,
right.
Because this work is important. And policymakers need to know that we're out here, we're watching now, we're paying attention now.
Right, and that's one of the common misconceptions. I mean, we do have an overwhelmingly apathetic, not just electorate, but when it comes to the appetite for social justice, people tend to like it on Facebook, but do we really get active and involved? A lot of times we don't. And a lot of times we don't know how, even if we do want to get involved. More so than that, there's an overwhelming, once again, thought that what I do will not matter. And so what we've seen is that even with a supermajority at the State House, with an issue that was perhaps thought to be a foregone conclusion that this law would be enacted, we were able to open up our mouths and strategize, and not just yell, but strategize. And think about the 13 different ways or the 19 different ways to approach a particular problem. We came out of Ferguson with a philosophy that said, by all means available, right? By all means available. Yeah. So what are the mechanisms, the vehicles? And just like we need to have multiple streams of income, we need to have multiple avenues toward the advocacy that we do.
Yes.
And there may be some times that we need to incorporate some things of old. I always want you to think that I have the ability to rally the faith community, and we're going to get in buses and we're going to rally around the State House. I want you to have that in the back of your mind. But in 2020, racism's more savvy, and so our social justice and advocacy needs to be more savvy. Yes. And so with a computer and with some clear and specific conversations that we are able to have, you can bring influence to bear and make people have some aha moments and let them think that what they thought was a foregone conclusion is not necessarily going to take place. This is a faith thing. This is a faith walk. And so, it's not in the Bible, but the Lord helps those that help themselves. Mm-hmm. The Bible does tell us that we are to exercise our faith, and that there are some things that we might not see, but if we believe that great can come to pass if you show up a lot of times, if you put yourself in a position to be used by God, then God will show up. Yes. And so that's what we've seen. That's what we saw in Fighting 279 last year.
That's what got my attention. I was aware of some of the work. Dr. Kelly, who's a member of our church, I was aware of some of the the substantive meetings. But that issue right there kind of galvanized us in terms of paying attention.
Right.
And in fact, my next question is just in that same vein: why is it important that citizens and leaders pay attention to public policy? Now, there are issues out there, things on the news come up a lot, but public policy is not on the news always, so why should we pay attention to public policy?
Well, public policy, these are the laws that are enacted that literally affect everything from the services that are provided in our neighborhoods to the money that we have in our pockets through taxes. We are a lot of times more so concerned, and right now we should be. I mean, you want to know the whether or not elections have their consequences, then we can look at national politics and we can see that, in my estimation, that we are witnessing the worst president that the United States has ever known. And so that's Donald J. Trump. And so we are experiencing that right now because we provided the platform through an election that took place, and now he's the president of the United States. And so from the administrative shifts and changes, and specifically the policy that comes down the pike because of that election, there's a reason for the backlog. There's a reason for the bureaucratic hazing that is taking place that keeps those that are historically disadvantaged from the resources that should be available if we, in fact, have a government that creates budgets that they understand are moral documents. What you put in that budget, it's like your checkbook at home. Let me look at your checkbook, and that will tell me what your priorities are. It'll tell me where your love is. And it's the same way with the state. It's the same way with the city. Let's look at that budget because it's a moral document, and it says whether or not Indianapolis or whether or not the state of Indiana has a soul. And so that's what we seek to compel people to do, is no matter what side of the aisle that you are on, we want to know whether or not, with widows and children and the most vulnerable within society, we want to know whether or not we can have a conversation with you that pulls on those heartstrings. And so the next work, yes, is to make sure that, as we've been very intentional about how the ministerium emerges, over a year and a half now, as we make our next steps, in order for us to continue to be effective at what we seek to do, we're going to have to build bipartisan relationships. We're going to have to look at specific issues. And specific issues with widows and children that we're looking at, because after that faith community consultation last February, we were able to work on 279, but during the summer, sort of in season and out of season, when we were out of season, we had meetings on a regular basis and leadership retreats to look not just at the internal workings and how we create an organization that's sustainable and effective and excellent, but we also were able to look at what issues were out there pertaining to widows and children, and sort of how to triage it, how to take it in, and how to rank it so that we know what we're working on, what we're supporting, what we're watching. And we had a consultation at our second consultation in October at the Urban League, and we were able to look again at a few issues. We carried over old business, if you will, 279, and have been working with the Children's Policy and Law Initiative to create research-based children's justice law.
Yes.
So as opposed to just reacting to that, we are in a position now to say that we're creating the necessary relationships and working within this coalition provided by the Children's Policy and Law Initiative's leadership. We're able to work in order to write laws for child justice, not juvenile justice, child justice. Remember, these are children.
Yes.
Children, neuroscience says that their brain is not developed until 25. And so when you have somebody that's 12 and 13, let's take that into consideration. And let's consider what the neuroscience says and what other states are doing, what others are doing, so that what we create is not reactionary based on a Noblesville situation, but it's based on the research that's been done in terms of neuroscience and the best practices that we see around the country. And so that's been the work off season, so that we're not just going to respond to stuff and fight stuff, but we're also going to be proactive and work with coalitions in order to promote something that's for the good of our kids. So we'll continue to work on that, and we're working on that in this session right now. In this session right now, we also carried over this pre-K issue. The pre-K issue in Indianapolis, in Indiana, state of Indiana, really, is that we have a pilot, and with that pilot money, there's law that provides what is known as a voucher. I like to call it a scholarship, but there's money that's provided for 4-year-olds to go to preschool. It's important not just for pedagogy, but it's important for social justice reasons. If I'm going to have a child that competes in kindergarten, I need to make sure that they're exposed to the same things. We need to make sure our children have the vocabulary and are able to have the primary and foundational skills that everybody else has, because you have kindergartners and first graders that aren't able to compete. And so as quick as we can get our kids into school, if you are in an area and in a system or even in a family that has been dysfunctional, this is the way to fight your way through that, and we have to get our kids in these programs early. Yes. The problem is with early childhood education, you have 4-year-olds that need to get in the program. to justify the need. The pilot money, once again, pilot money has gone from 5 counties to 20 counties, and now all 92 counties last legislative session have the ability to utilize money to take 4-year-olds to pre-K. They expanded last year from 125% to 183% of the poverty level as well. So there's a wider range of people that are able to go, but understand it's pilot money. And unless we drive demand through registration by making sure our 4-year-olds get in this program, they will say in the next couple of years, the pilot money is over. We spin it up, but there's no need for pre-K in the state because the drive and the census did not demand it. And so we have to make sure for a number of reasons that we're getting 4-year-olds in that program.
Yes.
And so the faith community will continue to get the word out to encourage our pastors and churches to not just get the information and inform ourselves, but how can we be advocates beyond our churches to reach out to our community and let the community know that it's important to register these 4-year-olds.
Some of us just found out.
Well, here we go.
I just found out right now. See, so hence our issue, right?
And hence our work.
Yeah,
which is what we do.
Yes.
So those are 2 things that we carried over from last year. We've picked up 2 more things in terms of specific legislative goals and legislation that's being enacted. Mom and infant mortality, not just infant mortality, but mom and infant mortality. Right now, there's legislation that will seek to attach a doula, so that there's midwifery that takes place with those that, once again, are under a particular level of income. But there are resources available right now for some consultation, but to provide a consistent doula program so that we can have not just infants, but moms are dying, mom and infant mortality. So there needs to be coaching among those, among our community. Not only is there a law that will increase the ability for those doulas or those midwives as well, but there's also this legislation will move from 6 weeks to an entire year the resources for postpartum depression or postpartum physical concerns, that there's 6 weeks right now that is not enough, and certainly we see that because of the problem. So mom and infant mortality, then lead poisoning. I mean, I'll let you talk for a while because lead poisoning is going to require me to take a breath and come back at it again.
No, we can see that your heart is full. I mean, full of love for the people, which you couldn't do this work without love for the people,
right?
And be this intense and be this prepared. Doc, we appreciate you and the brothers and sisters who are involved, engaged in this. Last May 15th, I was involved with. In fact, we did a live stream public service of the community advocacy strategy training,
right?
And that was my first direct encounter with ministerial work, and I was really pleased and kind of blown away with the depth and the quality of what I encountered. Mindy Goodpastor walked everyone through. This is how advocacy happens. Here's how we make presentations to our lawmakers and how things get done. For our listeners and viewers, there's a link right there on the screen, or you can look in the notes, show notes. You'll see the link to watch this recording of this event. You need to watch it. It's eye-opening. I think sometimes we as people and believers, we pray and we hope and we are upset about things, but faith without works is dead.
That's it.
Every day. And so what Dr. Hicks is doing, others are doing through the ministerium, is really showing us how to put works to our faith.
Right. Faith without works is dead.
Yes. So to the event last May, is that the kind of a model of what you want to do with informing the public?
Yeah, well, the event, that was right after the legislative session.
Okay.
And so we referred to before to in season and out of season.
Yes.
In season being while the legislature is in session.
In session, okay.
And so once they were out of session, we certainly had formed wonderful relationship with the United Way of Central Indiana, and specifically Mindy Goodpastor, who was the vice president of public policy. And so, once again, this is a scholastic pursuit for us,
Yes.
that we're going to have the necessary inquiry and not just pull people together to find out what's going on with specific issues. But when it comes to the development of the ministerium and our work, we thought the next best step for us to take was to do advocacy training, to train ourselves so that we could equip ourselves and anybody else that wants to come hang out with us, because anybody that cares about widows and children, anybody that cares to provide relief for those that need it the most. You're our friends. You can be a part of our coalition, individual or organization. We seek you so that we can get this taken care of. But so we have an opportunity and took an opportunity off season to do specific advocacy training so that we're equipping ourselves to be stronger leaders and to do this work.
Yes.
And also, we knew that there are many children and widow, most vulnerable issues that we could tackle. We needed to be cerebral. Let's think about how we take on work, how we determine what we're going to work on. And one of the great things from that presentation was, once again, how they do their work. They were concerned last year about pre-K and concerned about the hate crimes bill. That was the top of their pyramid, but that wasn't the only thing. There were some things that they were working on actively. There were some things that they were actively supporting and some things that they were watching. And so, so with that model, we were able to say, okay, well, this is the way. We're a new organization. We're trying to, figure out exactly how we proceed. And so we do the research and we hear from those that are in this area. And that has been a wonderful exercise for us as we have considered what we work on now. Mm-hmm. And so the 4 things that we're working on now were based on the metrics that was provided, the framework that was provided.
Could you restate those? I'm going to put up on the screen. I want people to see those 4. Mention those 4 items.
I'll give you those four areas that last year we dealt with juvenile justice law and Senate Bill 279. Yes. And so now, if I were to put a title, I'd say comprehensive child justice reform would be number 1. Yes. The second, early childhood education. Yes. The third being mom and infant mortality, and then the 4th, lead poisoning.
Lead poisoning.
Yeah,
here in the state of Indiana.
Here in the state of Indiana.
Not just Lansing, Michigan.
Not Lansing, just Lansing or Flint or Newark or in the state of Indiana. We've heard about Gary. There's specific legislation, and we're hearing about some remedy and relief that will come to Gary right now in the legislative session. Okay. And so here in the state of Indiana, but what we don't know for the most part is that the city of Indianapolis, and not just Center City, but Lawrence and Warren Township, these are hot spots for lead, and we have levels of lead in Indianapolis, Indiana that rival Flint and rival Newark.
Now, in whose interest is it for us not to be aware of this? I don't understand why we aren't fully aware and why everybody in public service is not on board.
Well, I think people steer away from controversy, but once again, it's one of those things that requires us to not just hear about the situation, but to do something about it. There have been press releases and press conferences, and toward the end of the month, there'll be another meeting down at the McKinney School for Law. The black our black legislators here, our caucus, they are looking at what legislation they will advance that will lead to the alleviation of some serious lead that we have here in this area. Specifically, the work then in this arena of lead poisoning. Once we understand how important it is, there has to be some work to deal with it. Lead is a big issue that we need to be dealing with, and we started working with the NAACP's Education Committee and Gary Holland, once again at School 42 a couple of years ago. We were able to observe some behaviors, and then Gary Holland was able to get resources to get children tested for lead at School 42. There was some elevated levels. Now we've been able to work. I had a meeting yesterday with Patrick from all of the innovation schools,
Yes.
or the mayor's innovation office, to make sure that all of the mayor's schools are now testing smaller children for lead.
Let's explain to maybe why is lead poisoning a problem? What are the long-term effects?
Yeah,
that you're paying attention to?
so lead poisoning kills, and it will eat away
But
at
not like it doesn't kill
slowly.
you like a gunshot.
No.
Okay.
It will slowly eat away at your brain.
Okay.
And so there'll be some function over time that will just be minimalized. And so how you see it most times within children, first of all, is behavior. And that's our widows and children, yes. And so we look at what happens with kids. We saw kids at School 42 that were sliding down the wall, and some kids were, they get some chips of paint and they'd eat it, and just different behaviors that if you are not careful, the lead won't be diagnosed because it presents as mental illness. And so with all of the mental illness awareness that's taking place, which is great right now, a lot of times in an environmental hazard zone, if you have children that are coming to school and lead is in their system, then they present as if though they have lost their minds, and it's because their minds are being altered and affected by the lead. And the problem then, one of the variables that needs to be considered is that then they get Prozac and Ritalin. So as opposed to dealing with the lead, which is a physical condition, they are given all of these alphabets, ADHDs and all of those, and then
false
put on
narratives, basically, right? Yeah.
Exactly, and put on. So you're dumbing down and you're medicating. Right, you're doping up the child, and you never deal with the core issue.
Yes.
Right, and so that's why this work is important.
Yes.
That we make awareness of it. So the ministerium and our faith community will be able to work specifically with figuring out how to, once again, be the faith infusion. How can the church, how can the faith community say this is what we can do in this specific instance? The NAACP and Gary Holland and others have been leading a lead initiative. And so it's not up to us to lead the initiative, but what we can do is say, how can we as a faith community work to do what we can do? And so this is what we discovered and what we're working on right now, specifically with lead. Yes, we want to push for legislation, but something, this big needs to be pragmatically dealt with. We have to really work on this so that we need to raise a whole bunch of awareness. But at the same time, we raise a whole bunch of awareness, we want to be able to provide some remedies. And so in the spring of the year, through some of the work of the ministerium, creating a coalition with others from IUPUI and IU Health and Faith Health Indiana, a new organization. It's a statewide organization that's emerging. We're going to work and coalesce as many partners and collaborators as we can to get the word out. Yes. About this situation. But at the same time, we want to be able to say, these are the signs of lead. This is how you deal with lead in your child. These are the signs of, these are the things to look for in your home. And you have to have your soil tested and the dust in your house tested and your water tested. Particularly if your house was built in the 70s or before. Which
many homes in the hood are old, and asbestos sometimes is still present, all that.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So let me dig a little deeper. So it's a big problem. Mm-hmm. We know that we're going to come in the spring of the year when we can actually test soil and things like that. It's cold right now. Mm-hmm. It's best to test in the spring and summer. Right. We'll have a campaign this year that will be a faith-led campaign that we will reach out to begin to bring this awareness, but also as we bring the awareness, we'll be able to once again tell you how to deal with your children and how to deal with your houses so that we may give you a great problem, but we're seeking to give you great solutions. The faith community can do this and will do this as well. That what we've discovered is that there are parents that will not get their children tested because they fear that CPS is going to come and take their children because their children have lead, or try to remove them from the house because they're in a house where there's lead, or the health department will then get engaged, right? And there's free testing for lead from the health department, but if the health department comes, they're also going to check everything else.
Right.
And so it is perhaps perceived as a gentrification move, or they're trying to run me out of my neighborhood. And you have parents and homeowners that are not availing themselves to the testing resources because of fear of some type of repercussion. And so the faith community then has worked out. I don't know if I'm necessarily supposed to be announcing, and I won't do the complete details, but we're working once again with IU Health and Faith Health Indiana, and specifically with IUPUI to develop kits that can go out into the neighborhood, and in the spring we'll designate an area as a pilot and go house by house.
And churches can help with that. We're trusted more than the government.
Absolutely.
By and large, yeah.
And so that's the thought, that we have worked something out so that as opposed to the health department coming in and looking at your lead and the other things they have to look at when they come out to look at your house, there'll be a packet where you can do through a van or a mobile unit some immediate testing. Water has to go away and come back, but the results don't go back to the health department. The results come back to you as the homeowner. The results come back to you because we want to make sure that we are creating an opportunity for the health of your children and the health of our community to be greater without the fear and repercussion. So we're seeking to solve a very serious need through the vehicle of the church and the faith community, right?
Yes.
And so I believe this is what God calls us to do. I believe this is what ministry needs to look like in 2020. That as resources dry up, we can provide that bridge gap service in many ways, but to make sure we remain on the wall and we remain the prophetic voice, and that we are working at the state level with the state legislature to identify problems and to provide advocacy and vanguard in that arena. But at the same time, as with lead and with these other issues that are women, that are widows and children issues, the most vulnerable issues, there has to be work that is practical and work that is greater than some people believe we have the ability to operate. So,
listen, friends, you've heard from Dr. Hicks. What I find is a profound presentation, a clear presentation, both about the need, but about solutions to the need, and how that we as the church, Jesus was clear about his concern, our concern for widows, children, the elderly, and disadvantaged people. Apostle Paul spoke about it. And there's no question but that this work is biblical and it's correct. The question is, why aren't all of us doing it to one degree or another? And as Dr. Hicks said, we don't have to lead it. We can support it, though. Whoever's doing something correct, we can get behind that.
And I want to do the right thing.
Yes.
When I get the glory, I want to be able to say I did what I was assigned to do.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yeah.
And different people have different assignments. And
we should.
And different pastors and different faith communities have different charges, and we should. But there ought to be some issues that allow us to come out of our own neighborhoods.
Come together.
And we ought to be able to come together around the relief for those that are most vulnerable within our society. And widows and children deserve our concerted effort and strong approach to relief.
Well, one thing I know for sure is that for this to happen, we cannot be about building our own kingdoms, all right? We got to be into building God's kingdom.
Thy kingdom come.
Yes, and that to me is the only way to come together. If brothers or sisters are trying to build their own thing, it's going to be difficult to come together and be supportive. But I pray that what has begun will continue through the ministerium. I pray you stay encouraged and stay on the wall.
Bless you, brother.
And you know what I'm saying? 'Cause we need you, brother.
Bless you, brother.
Final question, how can viewers and listeners learn more about the ministerium and be more supportive of the ministry.
I appreciate that. So we're a new organization, and because of our approach and because of the way we seek to operate, we want to provide an all call. If you are a member of a faith community, it is a fellowship among pastors, houses of worship, and so we do have a service that will take place on February 26th at First Baptist Church, North Indianapolis. It's our second year that we've done a consecration service. Last year, once again, we had men and women pastors, those from various different denominations and different ideological sides and sides of the track. Everybody came together around the issues that were presented earlier, and we determined that we would consecrate ourselves for specific work at the State House. That day, Dr. Gwen Kelly came, and we, on that day, signed and sealed over 1,000 letters that fought Senate Bill 279. We were able to, through those pastors, reach out and work with them to provide voice in particular ways. Everybody doesn't do it the same way, and we don't need that. We need for you to move in your vein and to use your influence, but we provided awareness about that issue. And so we'll do the same thing on February 26th this year at First Baptist Church.
What time is that?
That's at 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock.
At 880 West 28th Street.
Yeah,
so appreciate you allowing me to give a plug. Please join us at that time. And as you see things come forward, the ministerium does have a Facebook page.
Yes.
And so on our Facebook page, you'll be able to see some of the events and activities that we have participated in and perhaps even led over the last year and a half. And so we will continue to engage that way. But if you could encourage your pastors and your faith leaders to join us at appropriate times when we have our meetings and when we call for people to be at the State House or when we call for prayer, it's a group that is open to everyone. And so please come and join with us in that time and continue to pray for us that we will have the power and the strength and the stamina that you talk about before. But what I marvel at is the strategy that God provides. And so for strategy to deal with these issues and for, a lot of times we have to, in this ministry, be like Rumpelstiltskin, that we have to take straw and spin it into gold. And so we need a little Holy Ghost juice all mixed up in there. In order to make this work, because you have people on the other side of issues that have staffs. You have people on the other side of issues that have limitless resources. And so what I found to be greater than the most talented staff and the greatest of resources is people with righteous indignation and a God that supports him, because with God all things are possible. And so we believe in something better and greater for our children and for the widows, the most vulnerable. And it is because of our belief and because of our faith that we'll continue to do this work.
I tell you, this is wonderful. Hear the passion of Dr. Hicks, and we see the excellence and the scholarship behind the work. I'm appreciative, Doc. In fact, I'm looking now at the ministerium Facebook page. I'll put the address on the screen. It's kind of a long address. We got to work on that address, but I can shorten it. But I want you to log in to the Facebook page. That's their online presence for now. Connect yourself, like the page, follow the page to get updates, because this is one of the great works in our city, in our state, that deserves our attention and our support. So, Dr. Hicks, thank you for being on today. Appreciate your work.
Thank you.
Of love.
Thank you for all you do.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
We've been I've been speaking with Dr. Ivan Douglas Hicks of the First Baptist Indianapolis, and also with Indianapolis Ministerium. I trust you were informed and inspired by this conversation. I want you to share this conversation with others. I want you to follow the work that's being done by the Indianapolis Ministerium and to be supportive of these efforts to help the fatherless, the widows, the children who are fatherless sometime, and those that are disabled, those that are hurting, basically, in our society. Jesus told us specifically to pay attention to those persons, so they're doing that, and I believe it's no one can disagree that that's an area we can come together on. We can agree to meet that need and work together to that end. So God bless you. We'll see you next time. Be sure to log in to our website at visionstreamnetwork.tv. We have a podcast, and the podcast will contain this conversation, all the previous conversations. So you want to subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, on TuneIn, and be sure to keep up with what information we're sharing here through Conversations in Focus. God bless you. Have a great day.
Thank you.